questions? Yes.
You said about our fourth industrial revolution and how Washington's not addressing it. Aside from this $1,000 a month, what would be your plan to address this? How do we move forward in finding jobs for all these people who are losing jobs?
Thanks for the question. I did write a book about a whole suite of things that we need to do, so I'm going to give you the high-level version. Number one, this $1,000 a month, it's not just for individuals. If you imagine this town with an extra $1,000 a month, how many people live in this town?
3,200.
3,200. So let's say there was another $32 million in disposable income flowing through this town every day. And it was going to this coffee shop, the garage, the daycare center, the tutoring service, the nonprofit. Then each of these businesses might need to hire another person or two. You end up creating jobs right where people work and live. And you also end up spurring creativity and entrepreneurship, because someone would be much more likely to start something new if there was an extra $32 million circulating through the economy, and they knew that if their business did not work out, they wouldn't starve to death. They'd be okay. So the freedom dividend is a huge foundation for a different kind of economy that actually resembles our community's needs and values. But we can't stop there, we have to do more. You redefine our economic measurements so that people can see what the real problems are, and you see that we're in a mental health crisis, we're in a wellness recession, and then you start trying to solve those problems in a meaningful way. You reform our educational system so that people have access to the kinds of opportunities that will exist for a long time. We have to stop pretending that college is for everyone in this country. Only a third of Americans are going to go to college. We need to invest in technical trade vocational programs at the high school level. Right now, only 6% of American high school students are in a technical or vocational track. In Germany, that percentage is 59. Think about that gulf. And these are among the most resilient jobs that are going to be with us for years. Can you imagine what it would take to have a robot plumber or a robot HVAC repair person?
A robot childcare provider?
Or a robot childcare provider? Yeah, those jobs will be with us for a long time. So if we invest in those vocational programs, then we can prepare people for an economy that will be with us for decades to come. So those are some of the big moves I would make, but it starts with redefining our economic measurements to revolve around us and not the corporate bottom line. And I'll give you a couple of anecdotes. I spoke to 70 CEOs in New York City, and I asked them how many were looking at replacing their back office clerical workers with software and AI. Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All 70. Because if they didn't have their hand up, they could be fired the next quarter. Every CEO's incentives are just to maximize the bottom line, and the bottom line and our communities are now diverging in dramatic ways, and we have to line them up as quickly as possible. But thanks for the question. It's the right one.
Get the people that the haves to cooperate so that the have-nots don't.
If you didn't hear it, he said, how can we get everyone to cooperate in this vision and get the haves to care about the have-nots was what he concluded with. So I am not the only person who's looked at the numbers in our economy and concluded we need to change something very, very dramatically. Anyone else has looked at it and said the same thing? Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Chase, biggest bank in the country. He looked at the numbers and said we should declare a national emergency around the fact that the US economy is not working for most Americans. And then he said we should have a negative income tax, which is an income floor for all Americans. Does that sound familiar? So this is not the far-out futurist Asian man candidate. Like, this is like the CEO of JP Chase who looked at the same numbers and made the same conclusion. If you imagine a country where we all have an extra $12,000 a year to spend, is that good for JP Chase? Is that good for Amazon? Is that good for AT&T?
Sure.
Like, all of the companies actually win if we get this money into our hands. It creates a virtuous cycle. It's bad for them if the middle class disappears in this country, which it is. So if you look at my plan, there are many people who are at the top of the economic ladder who have concluded that this is the right approach. I've been endorsed by Elon Musk and many of like the prominent tech CEOs, and you would think that some of them would be like, wait a minute, like, you know, this might mean money out of my pocket. But they're smart enough to see that this is a win for everyone. And the greatest thing, it's a win for us, our families, our communities, because all the money would flow through our hands and make us stronger, healthier, better educated, and everything else that we want. The big guys don't lose through this. You have a follow-up?
I was just wondering, you think that unions are obsolete? We wouldn't really need unions if business owners and people with money would cooperate. And that's the only reason there's a middle class anyway, is because of unions. I'm speaking from experience.
I agree. Unions have been a historic force for good in terms of worker treatment and compensation and benefits. The middle class may not exist at all if not for unions. I'm pro-union. This money in our hands actually strengthens workers' ability to negotiate. And I know this because this plan was championed by a guy named Andy Stern, who used to run the biggest labor union in the country, the SEIU. And he said that if you had this money in workers' hands, all of a sudden every union could negotiate much, much harder, because they know if they do end up calling a strike, then people can go home and not feel like they're going to eat into their savings as quickly. You actually can survive for longer if push comes to shove. Unions have been an historic force for good, like a fortress against a storm, but the fact is the fortress has shrunk over the last number of years and the storm has gotten stronger. So this is the game changer for workers' rights and empowerment that will enable the fortress to start growing again.
Question?
Sure.
Hi, Mr. Yang. I appreciate your very creative financial economic policies, very outside the box, very welcome. But what would you do with the mess that's been created with the Iran problem and our shooting from the hip president we got right now?
I was one of the candidates who just immediately called this out as a grievous mistake, because 78% of Americans want nothing to do with the war in Iran. What does our Constitution say? It will be an act of Congress to declare war. And unfortunately, Congress has ceded that authority to the president over the last 19 years with the AUMF. It's why we've been in a constant state of armed conflict for almost 2 decades and counting. As your president, I would pull us back from the brink of war in Iran. I would repeal the AUMF and say it is for Congress to declare war, as was framed in the Constitution. I've signed a pledge to end the forever wars because I know Americans do not want to be in a constant state of armed conflict. We spent over $1 trillion in Iraq, $6 trillion in the Middle East, and I've talked to hundreds, even thousands of veterans who've struggled with health issues and PTSD and finding a path forward after they return. We have to stop paying this price and use these resources to make our communities stronger and more whole, and then invest in diplomacy and our historic partnerships and alliances abroad. It was James Mattis who said that if you spend more on diplomats, you spend less on ammunition, and that is exactly where I would lead us as president. You look like a reporter.
Hi, my name is Lauren Taruya, and I'm with USC Annenberg Media. So there are some Californians here today.
You're welcome.
So I don't know if your count might have to go a little bit down, but I wanted to ask you if you thought that your healthcare plan of Medicare for All is a little bit confusing to some voters, just because it's very different than the Medicare for All that Senator Sanders presents.
Thanks for the question, Lauren. And I welcome you from California.
Thank you.
I'm for universal health care. We should have health care as a basic right of citizenship in this country. The main way I differ from Bernie and Elizabeth on this is I would not legislate away private insurance. I think that millions of Americans enjoy their plans, and many, through unions, ended up negotiating away wages in order to have better health care benefits. So to me, it has to be for the government to provide this insurance coverage to the public and then demonstrate that it's better than private plans over time to consumers. But our current plan is not working, our current healthcare system is not working because it's not designed to make us stronger and healthier. We're spending $3.6 trillion on our healthcare, twice as much as other countries, to worse results. And the system is not designed to make us stronger, it's designed to make money for the drug companies, the device companies, and the private insurance companies. It does a great job of those things. Has anyone here ever gotten a letter from their private insurance company, great news, your rates are going to be lower this year? No American has ever gotten that letter. Because their business model is just to ratchet up prices every single year, and it's reached such an extreme that it's breaking our backs. It's the #1 cause of bankruptcy. On the economic front, it keeps us from changing jobs, certainly makes it 10 times harder to start a business, because if you don't have health care, how are you going to ever go off on your own? So this is what we need to change. We need to get our health care off of the backs of families and then free us up to do the kind of work that we want to do. And I'm the numbers guy. Anyone who talks about like how are you going to pay for this doesn't know what they're talking about, because we're already paying for it. We're paying for it through the nose, higher prices. Every job's a temp job because no one wants to give you benefits. There's so many prices baked into the current way we do healthcare that we can't help but save money as long as we get in there and have the government fighting for lower costs and higher access. All the times, like why the heck are prescription drugs so expensive? Why are we paying 2, 3, 4 times as much for our drugs as citizens of other countries for the same drugs that we help subsidize? And the reason we are paying so much for it is that the lobbyists are so powerful that they have kept our government from negotiating for lower prices on behalf of the American people. I don't know if you all knew that. So I've got a 5-part plan to get the prescription drug prices down. Number 1, of course the government has to be able to negotiate for lower prices on our behalf. Number 2, companies cannot charge us more than they charge citizens of other countries. Very reasonable. Number 3, if they fail at number 2, we can forcibly license that drug. And number 4, we have a public manufacturing facility where we can manufacture that drug. Number 5, we're allowed to import drugs from other countries. Do you think this plan would bring prices down? Yes. This is the only way we can bring prices down, because the drug companies only understand one language, and that's dollars and cents. You can stand outside their buildings every day and say, do the right thing, and it would not matter. They're going to get paid tens of millions of dollars to gouge us. And I know they're gouging us because I had a friend who's a financial genius look through the numbers of these companies and the businesses, and she said she has never seen profiteering and price gouging at this level in her life. And that it's so unsustainable. She said she's now going to bet against those companies and support my campaign for president to try and make it right. Sir.
According to your wiki page, your parents met at Berkeley,
Yeah, that's right.
and they're both from Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
I would think that that would give you a unique perspective growing up as an Asian American in terms of looking at the whole American promise. Could you talk about that?
I've never gotten that question, but I quite love it. So my parents met as graduate students at UC Berkeley in the 60s. My father went on to get his PhD in physics. When I was a kid, I thought that everyone's dad had a PhD. So I was walking around being like, what's your dad's PhD in? And then someone was like, this is what his PhD was in. So you learn. So I grew up one of the lone Asian kids in my upstate New York town. And this was the 80s, so there were only 3 TV networks, and then we had the 4th box, you know, remember that? Yeah. And so there was like a bit of an American culture that I always wanted to join. And whenever there was an Asian American on TV, I would jump up and down and run and get my family and be like, look, like someone Asian on TV. And it was always Connie Chung. And my parents got kind of tired of getting dragged to see Connie Chung on TV. So I love this country because it's given so much to my family and me. And my parents immigrated here to create a better future for me and my brother, and it totally worked. I mean, I'm running for president, so there's that. But my brother's a professor, you know, like I now have a niece and 2 beautiful boys. And I feel like my family also gave as good as it got to this country, and here's what I mean. So my father ended up generating 69 US patents for GE and IBM over his career. And when I was old enough to know what a patent was, I went to my dad. I was maybe like 13 or 14. I was like, how much do you get paid when you generate a patent? I was like waiting for like a big amount. And then he said, I get paid about $200. And I was like, that doesn't seem like very much. And he said, I also get a salary so I can feed, house, and clothe you and your brother. And I said, oh, I understand the deal now. But I say this because I feel like that was a good deal for the country. Because my dad generated 69 US patents for 2 great American companies over his career. and it was a great deal for my family. Everyone won. So this is the American dream in action, and we have to let people know that this is still the place you want to come if you want to start a life, have a family, start a business, do all these things that keep our country dynamic and competitive. If we lose that, then we're going to really lose the edge that has helped to fuel this country over the last number of decades. And as your president, it will be my pleasure to make the case to the rest of the world that this is still the place to be to live the American dream. And that if you come here, your son or daughter could wind up being president of the United States. We've got some questions over here. Miss.
Yes, I haven't been called that in a long time. Thanks. I got some numbers for you. We import nearly 90% of the food we eat here in Iowa. We export nearly 99% of what we grow. Our farms are getting bigger, and land prices have quadrupled in the last 25 years. We have a whole generation of people who want to come out and farm. A lot of them want to grow healthy food for their communities, and they don't have a prayer because they can't even get on the landscape. Now, aside from your dividend, what would you do to help rebuild rural economies and help these young entrepreneurs get out there and grow food for their people?
This is a tremendous question. I've heard it here in Iowa where the farms have gotten consolidated into these huge corporations, and then the huge corporations have these cost advantages that make it very difficult for family farms to compete. And then if the family farm wants to pass it on to the next generation, then that creates a whole host of problems. So what we need to do is try and level the playing field so that the individual family farm has a fighting chance. So I would put tax incentives in place that help balance the prices so that if you're a smaller farm, you actually can compete in some real way against the big guys. That if they have these low cost and cost advantages, then we have to try and balance that out for you all. Because to me, having consolidation in our agricultural production is not a positive thing for the U.S. In my opinion, small family farms need to be part of the process moving forward because a lot of that food, you'll have different types of food being grown, much more sustainable practices in at least some cases. And ideally, it can be healthier organic food that doesn't have the same processes that some of the biggest producers are using right now. But I'm a huge fan of what's happening in some of the more artisanal food communities. We need to make that more realistic because right now the market is all for the big guys. And it's not just agriculture. We can pretty much say that same story in just about any industry. Where like just the big guys are just dominating everything. This is one reason, and so I'm an entrepreneur, and one of the things I'm most passionate about is that people aren't able to start businesses or farms anymore. That a couple of generations ago, you might have started a business, but now we talk about how the internet is enabling entrepreneurship. It's not. Like 2 generations ago, you might have opened a flower shop or a hardware store or a local toy store, but now none of those things make sense because Amazon's there just hovering over things, being like, hey, if you want to sell something, I'll just undersell you immediately. And so we have to create a real pathway for people to be able to start businesses and farms and do the kind of work that they want to do. And it's not going to happen on its own because the market is becoming more and more extreme and winner take all. And this is driving our culture, this is driving our politics, this is driving a lot of our biggest problems right now. Miss?
Can you talk about your value-added tax, how that's implementation?
Sure, so the way we get the money from the Amazons and the Facebooks and the Googles of the world is you have to look around at the rest of the world. A lot of the other countries have looked at the same pattern and said, how do we make sure that we don't have our biggest companies paying zero back into the economy? And so what they did is they set up something called a value-added tax, which is like a toll at the point of sale that the company can't avoid. And one of the things I love about a value-added tax is you can ratchet it up on things that you want to target. Let's call it artificial intelligence, yachts, and luxury watches. And then you can ratchet it down or even exempt things that everyday people consume. Let's call it diapers and milk and toilet paper. And so then you can target things that you know are being consumed by the people who have the most or the companies that have the most. Right now, our biggest companies are playing games with our income tax system. I'm going to use a couple of examples just for fun. So I just commented that Jeff Bezos is worth $115 billion, which he is. if I were to ratchet the income tax up to 75, 80%, how much of his $115 billion would I get next year? Zero, because he's not dumb enough to pay himself $10 billion a year. Like, he just pays himself, you know, let's call it 10 million a year, and then he has all these billions like sitting around in Amazon holdings. So if you have this value-added tax, you get the money from his $1 trillion tech company while it's coming in. And then when he takes $1 billion out of his wealth every year to buy rocket ships to Mars, which is what he does, by the way, you know, you could have a big value-added tax on rocket ships to Mars. And then you take that money, put it into our hands, make us stronger, healthier, and more excited about the future. That is the plan. There was a joke that Willie Sutton, the bank robber, told. He said, like, why did I rob the banks? Because that's where the money is. We have to go to where the money is going, Iowa. The money's not staying here in your communities, and it's wrong. We have to go get it, return it to you, and everyone will win. Over there, I feel like I don't know. They're smiling at me, and I can't. So yeah, go ahead.
Hi. So what kind of policies or programs are you going to enact in order to help communities, farmers, just regular citizens be able to deal with climate change and the emerging effect that's happening, where we're having worsening storms, which is affecting our crops each year, which is we're also going to be having sea level rise. We're having just an assortment of things that are honestly going to affect the lowest people first, the worst, and then just going to keep going up.
How many of you all are concerned about climate change? Yes. You don't have your hand up. I don't know what to tell you. The biggest frustration I have is when politicians talk about climate change as something in the future we must prevent. Climate change is already here. Climate change has been with us for years. The last 4 years have been the 4 warmest years in recorded history. You all experienced historic floods that were fueled by climate change. How many of you saw the images from the wildfire in Australia right now? Does that look normal to you all? That looks like a scene right out of The Day After Tomorrow, one of those science fiction movies. And unfortunately, I know what movie you like. If you think about how much carbon is in that plume of smoke, that's like the biggest exhaust pipe we've ever seen out of Mother Nature. So climate change is here with us right now, and instead of pretending we're going to prevent it, we have to start investing hundreds of billions of dollars to make our communities stronger and more resilient and safer right now. It will save us money anyway because it's cheaper to build a more resilient infrastructure than it is to clean up after the disaster. And this is one thing I cannot believe Trump got right. I thought at least he would build bridges and roads and infrastructure just so he could put his name on them. I was willing to accept Trump Highway just to have the highway, or the bridge, or the levee, or the seawall, or whatever it was. But he just left us more to do. So we have to start making these investments immediately and not leave communities on your own. Because like you said, it's the poorest among us who are going to get hurt the most. We do need to move towards renewable sources of energy, wind and solar, and then subsidize that not just here but in other parts of the world. But realistically, this country is only 15% of carbon emissions. So even if we were to go to zero tomorrow, the world would continue to warm. So we have to stop pretending that we can prevent it and start acknowledging that we're on the curve right now and help make our communities stronger, safer, and more resilient. It would create hundreds of thousands of new jobs to invest in our communities, and we should do so immediately. All right, Tipton, I think it's selfie time. I think that's right. Do some selfies. We're going to do some selfies. Let's make history together in 4 short weeks. Thank you all so much.
Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you enjoy this political content, please consider subscribing.